A millionaire CEO's car broke down on a snowy night. But what she found inside a small-town garage changed her life forever. Before the story melts your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Your city might be next in our stories. Let's get started. The snow drifted down in silent flakes, covering Vermont's pine-lined roads in silver dust. Inside her sleek black sedan, Olivia Bennett sat tapping the steering wheel impatiently. The dashboard clock blinked 9:43 p.m. Another meeting delayed, another investor waiting, and Christmas Eve quietly slipping by without her noticing. Her Bluetooth buzzed again, a voice from her assistant reminding her about tomorrow's charity gala. Olivia sighed. She had built an empire, yet tonight she felt more alone than ever. Success had bought her everything except time, and the sound of her own thoughts echoed louder than the hum of her car. A sharp sputter interrupted the silence. The sedan jerked, lights flickered, and the engine died mid-turn on a narrow, snowy road. "No, not now," she muttered, hitting the steering wheel. The windshield wipers froze halfway across the glass, and the heater stopped blowing. The world outside was white, endless and still, not a single car in sight. Olivia tried her phone, but there was no signal. The irony stung. The woman who could connect the world couldn't even call for help in her own country's back roads. She leaned back, breathing out mist into the cold cabin. For the first time in years, she felt powerless. The world outside looked beautiful, but it was merciless. She stepped out of the car, heels crunching in the snow, and the wind bit her cheeks. She wrapped her coat tighter and looked around. The road stretched into nothingness, just pine trees and faint mountain shadows. Her expensive coat didn't keep her warm. It only reminded her how far she was from anyone real. She checked her watch again, muttering to herself, "Just great, Olivia. Merry Christmas to you too." Then distant headlights. They appeared like hope, breaking through darkness, growing brighter until an old dented tow truck rolled into view. The sound of its engine was rough but reassuring. It stopped beside her car, and the door creaked open. Out stepped a man in a thick flannel jacket and snow-dusted beanie. His boots crunched the snow as he approached, holding a flashlight. "Need a hand, ma'am?" he asked in a warm voice, his tone casual but kind. Olivia blinked. He looked nothing like the people she dealt with. His hands were rough, but his eyes steady, gentle. She hesitated before answering. "My car just died. I think the engine froze." He knelt beside the front tire, peering under the hood. "That's what happens when luxury meets Vermont weather," he said with a faint grin. She frowned, not used to people joking around her, but something in his tone was disarming. His tow truck idled beside them, and through its window, she spotted a little girl curled up under a blanket, asleep in the passenger seat. A tiny Santa hat covered her head, glowing faintly under the cabin light. The sight startled Olivia more than she expected. "You brought your daughter?" Olivia asked softly. "Couldn't leave her home alone," he replied, adjusting a wrench. "Single dad life. She wanted to see the Christmas lights on our way back." His voice carried no apology, only quiet truth. Olivia found herself watching him work, his breath visible in the cold, hands steady and practiced. No assistants, no suits, no rehearsed politeness, just real human effort. For a moment, she forgot how expensive her car was. All she saw was a man who showed up when she needed help most, without expecting anything in return. The wind picked up again, howling through the trees. Olivia shivered and tucked her hands into her pockets. He noticed immediately. "You can sit in my truck if you want. It's warmer inside." "Sophie won't mind," he said, nodding toward his daughter. She hesitated, but eventually followed, stepping into the tow truck's cabin. It smelled faintly of coffee and pine, the radio playing a soft Christmas tune. The little girl stirred, blinked sleepily, and smiled at her. "Hi," she whispered. "You're pretty." Olivia froze, caught off guard by the innocent warmth. "Thank you," she managed, smiling back. Outside, Ethan worked beneath her car, the sound of tools clinking softly under the falling snow. Olivia glanced out the window, watching him through the frosted glass. His movements were deliberate, confident, the kind that came from years of fixing what others gave up on. She wondered how long it had been since someone had fixed anything for her without an invoice attached. The radio crackled softly, and a Christmas song filled the air. Have yourself a merry little Christmas. She listened, her chest tightening. It had been years since that song meant anything. 10 minutes later, Ethan climbed back in, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Bad alternator, but I can get you running long enough to reach town," he said, glancing at her. "There's a diner about 10 miles down. They stay open all night for the holiday." Olivia nodded. "Thank you," she said genuinely. He shrugged. "No thanks needed." "You'd do the same." She almost laughed. "I don't think I'd know how." He smiled faintly, then turned the key, testing the engine. It coughed, then roared to life. She exhaled in relief as warmth began to fill the cabin again. They drove slowly back toward town, his truck leading the way. Olivia followed, headlights cutting through the white blur. The world outside looked softer now, the storm gentler, the silence comforting. When they finally reached the diner, Ethan parked beside her, gesturing toward the glowing sign. "They make good coffee," he said, "and the pie's famous." She looked at him, then at the sleeping child in the truck. "You should go home," she said quietly. "It's Christmas Eve," he smiled. "We will, after I know you're safe." Something about that made her heart ache in a way she couldn't name. Inside the diner, the warmth and scent of cinnamon hit her instantly. Ethan ordered 2 coffees, while Sophie curled up in a booth with a cookie the waitress brought over. Olivia sat across from him, still dazed by how quickly her world had shifted, from boardrooms and deadlines to laughter and cocoa with strangers. "You know," she said, "people don't usually stop like that anymore." He looked up, eyes kind. "They do. You just stop noticing." The simplicity of his words cut deeper than any business advice she'd ever received. For once, she didn't have a reply. As they sat there, the storm outside eased into silence. Sophie hummed along to the jukebox, swinging her legs. Olivia felt something strange, peace. Not the kind bought by success, but the kind that sneaks up quietly when life forces you to stop. She watched Ethan laugh with his daughter, the way he listened when Sophie spoke. It reminded her of a life she'd forgotten, the kind that wasn't measured by earnings or headlines, but by moments like this. And for the first time in years, Olivia Bennett, the woman who had everything, didn't want the night to end. The garage door groaned open, revealing a cozy space bathed in the faint glow of Christmas lights strung haphazardly along the beams. A small artificial tree stood in the corner, decorated with paper stars and bits of tin foil, clearly made by little hands. The warmth from a portable heater filled the room, and the smell of cocoa drifted faintly in the air. Olivia stepped inside hesitantly, brushing snow from her coat. She had been in countless luxury showrooms across the world, but none of them had ever felt like this, imperfect, small, but deeply alive. Ethan guided her car inside, wiping his hands on a rag. "Sorry for the mess," he said. "Sophie and I were baking cookies before the call came in." Olivia looked around at the mismatched tools, the scattered toys, the little chalkboard with notes written in a child's handwriting. "Daddy, fix Mrs. Green's car today." She smiled. "You have an assistant, I see." He laughed softly. "Yeah, best one I ever had. Though she eats most of the cookies before they're done." His voice carried that easy confidence of a man who'd made peace with life's imperfections. Sophie climbed down from the counter, holding a star-shaped cookie with pink frosting. "You can have one," she said shyly, offering it to Olivia. The CEO blinked. She wasn't used to kindness without motive. "Thank you," she whispered, taking a bite. It was too sweet, unevenly baked, but it tasted like something real. She hadn't eaten anything homemade in years. Ethan went back to the car, lifting the hood, his hands moving with effortless precision. Olivia found herself watching him, not as a mechanic but as a father, steady, patient, gentle. It stirred something unfamiliar in her chest. As Ethan worked, the sound of Christmas music played softly from an old radio, slightly static but comforting. Sophie danced along, twirling in her socks. Olivia sat on a stool, sipping cocoa from a chipped mug. "You two really love Christmas," she said quietly, almost to herself. Ethan smiled without looking up. "It's not about presents, it's about people. About slowing down long enough to be grateful." Olivia nodded, her eyes distant. "I used to love it too," she admitted. Before work became everything." The words slipped out before she could stop them. For once, she didn't correct herself. Ethan tightened a bolt, then glanced over his shoulder. "Work's important," he said gently. "But so is living." She looked at him, surprised by his calmness. "That's easy to say when you don't have 1,000 people depending on you," he shrugged. "Maybe, but even 1,000 people can't fill an empty room." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind that sinks deep and says more than words. Outside, snow tapped gently against the windows. Sophie hummed, decorating cookies with too much frosting, unaware of the quiet storm swirling inside the adults' hearts. A sudden crack of thunder made the lights flicker, then darkness. The heater went out, and the garage fell silent except for the wind outside. "Power's out," Ethan muttered, reaching for a flashlight. "Happens a lot around here." Olivia rubbed her arms. "It's freezing." He grabbed a box of candles from a shelf and began lighting them one by one. Soon the small garage glowed in warm golden light, flickering across the walls. Sophie clapped her hands. "It's like magic," Ethan chuckled. "See? Who needs fancy decorations when you've got candles?" Olivia couldn't help but smile, the soft light making everything feel strangely beautiful. He brought out 2 mugs of cocoa from a thermos, setting one in front of her. "You ever stop long enough to drink one of these?" he asked with a teasing grin. She lifted it to her lips, the sweetness coating her tongue. "Not since college," she admitted. He leaned back against the workbench. "Then tonight's as good a time as any to start again." Sophie climbed into her dad's lap, whispering something in his ear before falling asleep against his chest. The sight hit Olivia harder than she expected. It was so tender, so simple, it made her ache inside. Ethan carefully carried Sophie to a small couch in the corner, covering her with a blanket. Olivia watched him, her breath quiet, her chest tight. When he turned back, his voice was softer. "She's all I've got. Her mom passed away when she was 3. Every Christmas, we light a candle for her." Olivia looked down at her mug, suddenly blinking fast. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He shrugged gently. "It's okay. Grief's just love with nowhere to go." The words lingered in the air, glowing like the candlelight around them. She envied his strength, the kind that came from surviving, not winning. For the first time, Olivia talked, really talked. She told him about her parents who passed too soon, about how she buried herself in work to outrun loneliness. She told him about empty hotel rooms and meaningless parties, about how success became her armor. Ethan didn't interrupt. He just listened, his eyes never leaving hers. When she finished, he said quietly, "Maybe you were never running from loneliness. Maybe you were just waiting for someone to understand it." The simplicity of it disarmed her. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No judgment, no pity, just truth. The storm outside began to fade. Candlelight flickered on the walls, and the radio sputtered back to life with a Christmas classic, Silent Night. Ethan smiled faintly. "Looks like even the radio's trying to remind us what night it is." Olivia laughed softly for the first time all evening. "You really think Christmas still means something?" He looked at her with steady eyes. "I think it's the one time a year we're all allowed to believe again, even if it's just for one night." She nodded, her throat tightening. "I'd forgotten what that feels like." "Then remember it," he said simply. They sat there in silence, sipping cocoa while Sophie dreamed on the couch. The warmth from the candles wrapped around them like a quiet embrace. Olivia glanced at him, his hands rough from work, his face tired but kind, his eyes reflecting firelight. He looked nothing like the people in her world, yet somehow she felt closer to him than anyone she'd ever known. For the first time in years, she wasn't calculating. She wasn't performing. She was simply present. The storm might have killed the power, but in that small garage, something else had come alive. When the clock struck midnight, Ethan whispered, "Merry Christmas." Olivia smiled back. her voice barely above a breath. "Merry Christmas, Ethan." The world outside was still and silent, the snow glimmering softly through the frosted window. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, deadlines, meetings, or reality, but tonight she didn't care. Because in that tiny candlelit garage, surrounded by warmth, laughter, and the hum of something unspoken, Olivia Bennett, the woman too busy for Christmas, had finally found a reason to stop. Morning sunlight filtered through the frosted windows, painting soft golden patterns across the dusty floor. Olivia blinked awake on the small couch, still wrapped in the blanket Sophie had shared. The gentle crackle of the fire was the only sound in the garage. She sat up slowly, realizing she hadn't slept this peacefully in years. Outside, snow lay untouched, sparkling like crushed diamonds under the pale winter light. She caught sight of Ethan by the car, already working, quiet, focused, unaware that something inside her had shifted overnight. The CEO who had everything suddenly envied the man who had peace. When she stepped closer, Ethan looked up with his easy smile. "Morning, city girl," he said softly. "Coffee?" She nodded, accepting the mug. "You fixed it," she murmured, glancing at her car. The engine purred perfectly, as if it had never broken down. "Yeah," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Turns out it just needed a little patience and care. Funny how most things do." His words hung in the air, warmer than the coffee between her palms. Olivia stared at him for a moment, realizing he wasn't just talking about the car. Sophie came running, hair a messy halo, carrying the small paper star she'd made. "Miss Olivia, can you help me put it on the tree?" Olivia blinked. "You want me to?" Sophie nodded eagerly. Together they stood by the little Christmas tree. Sophie lifted the star, and Olivia guided her hand to place it at the very top. The light from the window caught the tinfoil edges, making it shine brighter than any ornament she'd ever seen. "Perfect," Olivia whispered. For a moment, the three of them just stood there, wrapped in the quiet magic of a simple morning. Ethan leaned against the workbench, watching them. "You know," he said softly, "I think that tree just got its first real wish." Olivia looked at him. "And what's that?" He smiled faintly. "For you to believe in Christmas again." She laughed quietly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Maybe it worked. There was something in her voice, a tremor of truth, a confession she hadn't planned to make. She looked around the small garage, the chipped paint, the crooked lights, the smell of coffee and oil, and realized it felt more like home than her penthouse ever had. As the morning stretched on, she lingered. Ethan tried to protest when she offered to help clean the tools, but she insisted. "You fix my car," she said. "Let me fix your chaos," he grinned. "That's a losing battle." They worked side by side, and with every shared laugh, every glance, the distance between their worlds shrank. When she left that afternoon, Sophie hugged her tightly. "You'll come back, right?" The question hit deeper than it should have. Olivia smiled, kneeling. "I will, sweetheart. I promise." But as she drove away, her chest ached. She already missed them both. Hours later, Olivia stood in her office overlooking the city. Below, the annual Christmas gala glittered in gold and champagne. She was supposed to give a speech about success, growth, and the company's vision, but the words felt hollow now. Her assistant buzzed in. "Ma'am, the board is waiting." Olivia looked at her reflection. Perfect hair, perfect suit, perfect emptiness. Then she smiled softly and took off her heels. "Tell them something came up," she said. "Something more important." Before anyone could respond, she grabbed her coat, a small wrapped box, and walked out into the falling snow. Back at the small garage, Ethan was closing up for the night when he heard a familiar car pull in. He turned, eyebrows raised, as Olivia stepped out, her breath visible in the cold. "You again," he said, half smiling. "I thought CEOs had better parties than this." She held up the box. "They do," she said. "But none worth missing this for." Ethan hesitated, warmth creeping up his neck. "You didn't have to," she cut him off with a quiet laugh. "I wanted to." Sophie ran out, squealing, "Miss Olivia!" Olivia knelt, opening the box. Inside were toys, cookies, and 3 handmade stockings. "This one's yours," Olivia said, handing Sophie a tiny stocking with her name stitched in gold thread. "And this one's for you," she added, giving Ethan one with crooked embroidery that clearly wasn't store-bought. He smiled, turning it over in his rough hands. "You made these?" She nodded shyly. "Don't look too closely. I had help from YouTube." They laughed, and for a moment time seemed to pause. Just laughter, firelight, and snow tapping against the windows. Olivia rolled up her sleeves, helping Sophie decorate cookies again, her polished hands now dusted with flour instead of diamonds. As the evening deepened, they shared dinner, nothing fancy, just roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and cocoa that Sophie insisted on pouring. "To new friends," Ethan said, raising his mug. "To real Christmas," Olivia added, clinking hers softly against his. Sophie giggled, crumbs on her chin. Later, when she fell asleep by the fireplace, the garage grew quiet again. The glow from the candles painted soft halos around them. Olivia sat on the couch, her voice barely above a whisper. "You know, I used to think Christmas was just another business opportunity. Now I think it's the only thing that ever felt real." Ethan watched her for a long moment. "You changed something in this place," he said. "It feels different tonight." She looked around, smiling. "Maybe it's the candles." He shook his head. "No, it's you." His words landed gently but deeply, and she couldn't look away. The air between them hummed softly, fragile, electric, sincere. She leaned back, sighing. "Oh, what happens when Christmas ends?" He smiled. "Then we find a way to make every day feel a little like this one." Olivia looked at him, her heart quiet for once. "I'd like that," she said softly. The snow outside thickened, swirling in slow circles. Ethan reached for a blanket, draping it around her shoulders. Their fingers brushed, a small, unspoken spark that neither pulled away from. "You're freezing," he murmured. She smiled. "Maybe I just needed a reason to stay a little longer." He chuckled. "You don't need an excuse." Olivia looked up at him, eyes shimmering in the candlelight. "Then I'll stay." Silence wrapped around them, broken only by the soft crackle of firewood. When he sat beside her, she rested her head on his shoulder, and the world outside disappeared. In that quiet moment, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Her heartbeat slowed against his, and his hand found hers, rough, steady, real. The clock ticked softly toward midnight. "Merry Christmas," she whispered. Ethan smiled. "The best one yet." He turned slightly, and for a breathless second their eyes met. No rush, no perfection, just warmth and truth. When their lips met, it wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was gentle, like two people who'd been walking alone for too long, finally finding home in each other. Outside, snow fell like blessings, covering every trace of yesterday's storms. Later, as the fire dimmed, Olivia whispered, "You fixed more than my car, Ethan." He smiled, brushing his thumb across her hand. "And you fixed more than my heart." She laughed softly, eyes glistening. "I think we both needed saving," he nodded. "Then maybe that's what Christmas is for, finding the broken things worth keeping." The line lingered, filling the small space with something sacred. When the first light of dawn crept through the window, they were still there, not CEO and mechanic, not worlds apart, just two people, wrapped in love, holding on to the Christmas they'd never forget.